Let's move then to the passage from James 4, 13 to 17. And before we get to asking you about your subject questions, what do you see going on in this text? What do you see arising from this text? Because one of the things, what do you see arising now? What do you see arising in this text? From the James text on your sheet.
It's part of a larger conversation.
Sure. Yeah. Right. But in terms of this chunk here, let me ask you this. One of the things that Robinson talks about is what does this text say about God? Is something to think about. Because that can lead us to understanding the theological thrust of the text. What does this text say about God? What would you say?
If God wills something, it's going to happen.
Okay, so what's a theological term we would say?
Sovereignty.
Sovereignty. Okay, all right. So then what's this text say about humanity?
That you are dependent.
Okay,
Not tough.
you're not. Okay. So
We're brief.
brief. Okay. So you see when you're trying to figure out the idea of the text, you want to also see, is there a theological emphasis or emphasis that's being discussed in the text? And so and that may well influence how you shape the subject question that you come up with. So what do you have here? Well, let me ask you this. Who is James talking to in this chunk right here?
James is talking to the dispersed Christians.
No, you're talking about the wider thing, but I'm talking about in this chunk, who's he talking to right here?
Presumptive boasters.
Presumptive boasters, okay. All right. Well, but look at the text more closely. Okay, who said that? Yeah, he's talking to business people. Today or tomorrow, you go to this city and we're spending a year making money. He's talking to business people. Okay. All right. So we understand that it's in a passage that's dealing with, you're speaking to this verse, but now he's talking to a specific group of people, but there are other people who are learning from this, overhearing from this, okay? And those are the other folks to whom he's writing. So keeping all this in mind, what do you think would be a subject question for this text? Wait, she started. Why does James
tell his readers not to presume upon tomorrow?
Okay. Anybody else?
Why does James want the people to not predict the future?
Okay. Now, yes.
How to plan our life in light of God's sovereignty.
Okay, but to whom is he speaking? I'm trying to bring this all together. He's talking to.
How does James want business leaders to think about their lives?
Yeah, how does James tell business people it is important to acknowledge God's sovereignty? Okay. And then what's the complement to that? What would you say? If we said, why does James tell business people it is the importance of acknowledging God's sovereignty? What would that be?
God is the one who knows the future. He knows, when one knows the Lord has nothing to do with it, it's a sin.
Yeah, and well, he says, if you have God who is sovereign, who is overall, how is humanity pictured in this? How is the business person actually pictured as being? No, yes, but I'm talking about pictured. It's pictured here, imaged here.
A mist.
Ah, a mist. So you've got this great God who is God, eternal, and then you've got a vapor, you see. And so there's that tension there. Why does James tell business people the importance of acknowledging God's sovereignty? Because they are finite and not in control. But God is. Otherwise, they sin by not submitting to God's will. One of the tough portions of this passage is that last line. What's the last line?
If anyone,
Then does
they know.
good they ought to do it. And some people want to, we're tempted to leave that out because we really don't know what to do with that. And that's what often happens with preachers who wrestle with texts and then they're not really comfortable with what the text is saying or don't know what to do with that, so they ignore it. My wife was teaching Sunday school this past Sunday, and there were 3 chunks in this text that they were studying, but the person who wrote the lesson about the book that she left out the center one. And I said, well, obviously that person didn't know what to do with that center section, you see. So here you've got this passage. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do, what's the good they ought to do? In light of this passage.
Submit to God.
Yeah, recognize God's sovereignty, that God is, and doesn't do it, then you sin. You see? So, this type of sensitivity to what's going on in the passage will really help you to be able to capture the idea again. You have a question?
How were you able to ascertain from the text that it's to business, like to?
Well, it says here, today or tomorrow, if you go into this, let's say, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Yeah.
Because like in ESV it says and trade and make a profit, but we were wondering like, isn't kind of human living kind of engaging in commerce?
You could say, but he's specifically talking to these folks who are doing just that, engaging in commerce,
Yeah.
and they're not recognizing that God is even sovereign over their commerce. You see, and so it's like so many of us they're making money. They think that they are somebody who's going to make all the decisions, and they aren't. God is. So, does it make sense? Okay. And then we have the passage from John 3:16 to 18. What do you think? What do you think the subject question is?
Save the world. That is the one we save.
Okay. Anyone else? Think about how you shape it into a subject question. Because who's saying this?
This is Jesus.
Yeah. Okay.
Who does John want people to believe in?
Sorry?
Who does John want people to believe in?
Okay, or how do you bring it all together that Jesus is talking, but John is writing this? What do you think?
How does God show his love?
Yeah, well, you could say, why does Jesus say in John's gospel that God sent his son into the world? Okay? What I'm trying to do is to keep you anchored close to the text when you state what the subject question is. Okay? And it may seem a little awkward, but that's what you want to do. Stay in the world of the text, and then and keep it as close to its address as you possibly can. Okay?
And in this context, it would be also okay to include Nicodemus into it. Why does Jesus say to Nicodemus, God so loved the world?
Yeah, you could, yeah. Why does Jesus say to Nicodemus in John's gospel that God sent his son into the world? That those who believe in him will not be condemned, but have eternal life. Make sense? So, what we've been doing today is we've been walking through, looking at how powerful ideas are, and that they are prevalent and relevant. And we have a responsibility as preachers to understand what the idea of the biblical text is, so that then we can communicate the idea of the biblical text to our listeners. It's basic homiletics. It's basic preaching. And you have experienced and seen and heard some ways in which we can be derailed in doing just that. But once we have the subject question, the complement answer, the exegetical idea, and the homiletical idea, we're really quite close to getting a sermon together. What I'd like to do is to show you that sheet that's in your packet. This is from Matthew chapter 28, 11 through 15. Matthew 28, 11 through 15. I thought I'd share this one because it's going to be fairly relevant as we look forward to the next coming weeks. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And Matthew says, and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. So, what I have here is clunky, but I'm admitting this is a little clunky, but what happened after the guards reported to the chief priests about the resurrection of Jesus? The chief priests conspired with the elders and bribed the guards to change their story to say that Jesus' disciples came during the night and took Jesus' body to discredit the story that he had risen from the dead and to spread the false story. Because there's a true story here that's lurking about, and then there's a false story that's here that's lurking about. Bringing the subject and complement together is into the idea. After the guards reported to the chief priests about the resurrection of Jesus, the chief priests conspired with the elders and bribed the guards to change their story to say that Jesus' disciples came during the night and took Jesus' body to discredit the story that he had risen from the dead and to spread the false story. So my task as a preacher, as I'm preaching on Resurrection Sunday, is to take this large exegetical idea and fashion it in a way that's going to have relevance and power for my listeners in the 21st century. And my homiletical idea is, get the story straight. Jesus really did rise from the dead. And so that becomes the homiletical idea that I use to fashion the sermon. The homiletical idea is the roof, and every then aspect of the sermon supports that. So here's my attempt at an introduction. Robinson's approach to homiletics, introductions get attention, raise need, and orient the listener to the text, sermon, or idea. Let me say that again. Introductions get attention, raise need, and orient listeners to the text, sermon, or idea. So, as you look at this idea, the exegetical idea and the homiletical idea, what do you think is the, if I wanted to raise attention, get attention, what would you want to do to get attention? Don't look at my introduction yet. What will you do to get attention? Sorry? Yeah, like what kind of illustration? That's true. But what are you trying to get their attention about? You see what I'm getting at? What is the attention you want to get about?
You might use an illustration of maybe a case that may have been judicial, or even an allegory story that may have had a comparison of a true story as opposed to a false
Okay,
story.
that's one way. All right. What else? Get the attention about what?
Fake news, yeah.
Sorry?
He said that you might bring out possibly fake news.
Yeah. You see, so what you're doing there is playing on that which is familiar to your listeners to create the need. Okay, you get attention around, and then you create the need. And what's the need here? What's the need that you see in the text that needs to be done here? Sorry?
Truth to prevail.
Truth to prevail, but truth about what?
Jesus.
What about it? Come on. That's right. Okay. Yeah. And that's answer. Who rose from the dead on Jesus? So you get attention, raise need, and then you in the introduction you orient them to the text. That is what's going on in the text, or text idea, or what did I say? Oh dear. Sermon. Yeah, sermon structure. Sorry. Yeah, text, idea, or sermon structure. So there are different ways, because you could say, well, there are 4 ways that I want to show you how God works through this story. Whatever. Do you see what I'm getting at? You map that out for. So in this, I do it this way. I've not had the best experience with journalists. I hope there aren't any journalists here, please forgive me. I realize they have a job to do. They write stories, they get stories, they are compelled to get a story. I remember interviewing with a reporter about a project on which I'd been working. I asked her when the story would be published in the paper, and she told me when, and I anxiously awaited to read it. I was interviewed by a reporter, and I'm going to be in the newspaper, I thought boastfully. Then the story appeared. But the quotes she wrote that I had said weren't exactly what I thought I said. They were tweaked, even outright changed. In fact, they didn't reflect what I meant either. I felt manipulated. I felt misrepresented. I didn't feel this reporter got the story straight. It certainly didn't let the readers know the straight story. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been misrepresented by someone else? He said this or she said that, but you know it wasn't true. Not getting the story straight is a problem. And it was a problem that surrounded Jesus' death and resurrection. I'm sure you can imagine the word twisting and the story shushing that happened after the resurrection. And that's what we encounter today on this Resurrection Sunday. The text we're looking at this morning shows something quite troubling about the news of Jesus' resurrection. Is it the straight story? Well, let's see. Please turn with me to Matthew chapter 28, verses 11 through 15. That's Matthew 28, 11 through 15. And we'll see in this text just what the disciples then and now are confronted with in light of Jesus' resurrection from the dead. That's Matthew chapter 28, beginning with verse number 11. As is the case in this text, what is the reaction that people have to the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead? So my structure then is some folks don't like the straight story. But for us, I'm just looking at the main thing for now, but for us, we want to get the story straight. So what do we learn to learn and practice in light of the false story in this text? It is this: get the story straight. Jesus really did rise from the dead. So what I've done here is I have developed what's called an inductive sermon. I don't state the idea up front. Deductive sermons will state the idea, and it could be preached deductively. After my introduction, I could say, I want you all to know, and I want you all to do this. Get the story straight. Jesus really did rise from the dead. And then I could say some folks don't like the straight story, but we want to get the story straight. Do you see what I'm doing? There's the deductive way and inductive way of shaping a sermon. There are other nuances on that, but that's basically what you have. And so I chose to do the inductive way because it's a much more softer way to get to what I'm getting at instead of being confrontative at the beginning. Because there might be, this is what I'm thinking, there might be people who come to that service on that Resurrection Sunday who don't really believe in Jesus, doubt Jesus, and this shape might move them by the work of the Spirit toward the idea itself. Because I want to be sensitive to the listeners who are there. Yes.
Sorry, I'm backtracking a little bit. I really appreciate that you've got your audience's purpose or your purpose for the sermon.
Yeah.
Can you flesh out a little bit how you write your purpose as well?
Yes, you'll notice on here, thank you for raising that, there's a purpose statement. That's the final step in Robinson's approach to homiletics. It's a purpose statement. And that's my goal, my focus in line. That's not my homiletical idea, but that's my goal of what I want to take place in the lives of the listeners. Now, of course, that's a prayerful expectation. But it helps in the shaping and direction of the sermon as I shape it, and that's why I shaped it the way I did inductively. So Robinson's approach is subject, complement, exegetical idea, homiletical idea, and purpose. And so one of the ways, of course, that you determine and are sensitive to the purpose is you're looking at the purpose of the text of the biblical author. And in this case, Matthew certainly is wanting to dispel any doubt about the question that Jesus rose from the dead. And so, the sermon begins. Does that answer your question in terms of purpose? Does that make sense to you? And what I always do with the purpose is, as a result of this sermon, I want my listeners to ... Always use the same thing. As a result of this sermon, again, it's a prayerful expectation. I can't necessarily determine exactly what God's going to do in people's lives. But I want to be an instrument toward that end. So, you'll notice too, I write out, I've written out introduction, and then this is my outline. This is the outline I have here is my outline for the sermon itself, and I don't have the conclusion written out, but I write that out as well. But just so you can see, the outline is very clear, crisp, and I'm always dealing with ideas. I don't put anything in my outline that's a question except in the transition, because I'm dealing with ideas. So you'll see after I've read the text, as is the case in the text, and it's in parentheses. I put transitions in parentheses, and you'll see that in Robinson. As in the case of this in this text, what is the reaction that people have to the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead? Well, this text shows us that some folks don't like the straight story. Now, I that's my style. Some folks, I'm from a rural area. That's where I'm from, you know, and so that's how I talk. And so, write as you talk. You're not doing a lecture from Oxford or anything, but you're write as you talk, because that's how people listen. And so some folks don't like the straight story. Roman numeral letter Arabic A, the Roman and Jewish leaders didn't want to tell the truth about Jesus' resurrection. That's an idea. B, there are stories and there are stories. Some stories are told truthfully, while others are embellished, changed, or even twisted. C, sometimes we don't like the straight story. And then D, some folks don't like the straight story. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, what's he doing there? This is an approach to preaching that I teach my students because it's a very, let's see, this is, I'll do that one later, sorry. Yeah. But it's a very simple, and I'll get to it in a few minutes, about an outline. This is an outline that's flexible and useful, and I'll refer to it in a few moments. But some folks don't like the straight story, D, on Roman numeral 1. But for us, we want to get the straight story. Matthew's intention was that all the followers of Jesus then and now would get the story straight. What are we to learn and practice in light of the false story of this text, it is this: get the story straight. Jesus really did rise from the dead. The gospel writers affirm, I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but at the end, it reaffirms in the conclusion, get the story straight. Jesus really did rise from the dead. Now, this is a simple sermon structure that you can use, and I'm going to refer to that in a few minutes, but I wanted to show you something here as well from Matthew chapter 6, 19 to 34. And you'll notice here, 19 to 34, there's the treasures in heaven and no one can serve two masters, and then do not worry. I have a little bit of a confession here. Maybe I shouldn't have. But I heard a sermon recently, and one of my problems, I can't get away from being a homiletics professor. And so I'll sit in the congregation and I really struggle with the way the person has dealt with the text and especially communicated the text. So this one, the preacher had invest wisely, serve God, don't worry. All those are ideas. All those are good ideas. But that was it. Basically 3 separate mini sermons. Not brought together. And I thought, well, it was cut apart but not joined together. And so I sat there and I thought to myself, self, how would you do it? Invest in God. Why are we to invest in God? Because we have nothing to worry about. This text tells us, invest in God because we have nothing to worry about. What you want to think about, the thing is, how do you bring the text together into an idea that's going to be something that is apprehendable, understandable by your listeners. Clarity is one of the biggest things that's missing in preaching. We get in our own way when it comes to clarity. We want to provide lots of information, but it also provides a lot of confoundation in your listeners. And so the question for us is, what is necessary, what is needful for your listeners to understand what's going on, and to help them to see that this all hangs together. This text seemed to me that it didn't hang together. I had bits and pieces, but I didn't have a full understanding. It was almost there, but it wasn't there. And for our preaching, we don't want simply to be almost there. We want to be there. Because that's where our listeners are expecting us to be. That's where they don't have the background that you have. They don't have the understanding that you. They don't have the study that you. All they have is you standing up there. And it's typically oral communication. And that's it. So the question is how can we be exceedingly clear about what the biblical text is saying? And then how can we be exceedingly clear about getting that biblical text across to our listeners so that there's not any confusion? So you want to outline with clarity. And let's go back to the sheet that I handed out to you. As I mentioned, preaching is an oral event. And so what people hear, sometimes they hear it and you say it once, but then it's gone. It's like the bus that passes them. And if you're not clear, and especially if you're not repeating what you're getting at, they're not going to get it. I tell my students, you want to repeat your homiletical idea at the minimum 3 times. But especially if it was like structured with this, like this one, and you get to the homiletical idea in the last move, in number 3, then in the conclusion, you have the responsibility to pound it away. I don't change the wording. I pound it away as the same thing. Because that's what I want them to remember. I want them to leave the worship with one of these lifesavers. This is the homiletical idea, put it into their mouth, and they're sucking on it, and they're savoring it, and they're trying to understand it and allow it to soak into their souls. So, preaching is an oral event. Listeners crave for clarity. So make it simple. Billy Graham is said to have said, put the cookies on the lower shelf. Help your listeners to get it, to understand it. And I have a suggested outline format for you, which will help, I think, explain this. It is this. If you notice under, and I should have numbered these differently. These should be A, B, C, D. Really, I'm sorry, I should have done this. It's A, B, C, D. Because it's the A, B, C, D in here. Okay? So if you look at your outline, I have in the first move statement, some folks don't like the straight story. The Roman and Jewish leaders didn't want to tell the truth about Jesus' resurrection. I'm focusing on the text. That's where some, and under this, I don't have all the the small a and all of that, and the number ones and all, underneath all of this. But that's where all that texture is there. But I don't go, again, give them what they need to know, and that's it. Under B, which is, I'm sorry, you should provide an illustration, that's what's there. There are stories and there are stories. And then I give an actual illustration under that that reflects what is going on in the text. And then C, it's what I call pushback. We live in a culture today where there are people who question everything you say. You don't think so? Oh yeah. They're not little puppet there drinking anymore. They're questioning everything you say. You're questioning a lot of what I'm saying. And it's okay. But you want to remember, whether it's theologically or culturally, personally, experientially, there are going to be people who are saying, So in this, sometimes we don't like the straight story. So let's just explore that a moment. Why do you think there are people who don't like the straight story in dealing with this text? Why? Just help me out. Why do you think some people don't like the straight story?
Makes them look bad.
Okay, makes them look bad. All right, what else? May require change.
It's not believable.
Sorry?
It's not believable.
It's not believable. So do you see what I'm getting at? So as a preacher, if you even acknowledge these pushbacks, you'll potentially create a bridge between yourself and your listeners and away from the gospel. Okay? And then, it's very pedantic, I know, but D is repeating the idea of that move. And then, but for us, number 2, we want to get the story straight. Well, Matthew's intention, see, I'm focusing on the text. Matthew's intention was that all the followers of Jesus, then and now, would get the story straight. And then that A deals with that a little bit, shown from above, okay? Then B is an illustration. when we tell others how Jesus changed our lives, we're telling the story straight. So then the testimony of citing testimonies of people, maybe in the congregation. 2 weeks ago, Bill was baptized. You know what I'm saying? Those kind of things that draw people in. So you're not having to search for illustrations necessarily in some database somewhere. It's your database, and your reading and your engagement with people and all of that. It's that kind of thing. Then C, pushback. Getting the story straight may not be easy for some of us. Why do you think that that's the case? Let's explore that. Why do you think getting the story straight may not be easy for some of us? Because,
We may not fully understand.
okay, yeah, we may not fully understand it.
It may be hard for us to accept.
Okay. So you see what I'm getting at? You're exploring that, and then but we want to get the story straight. So what do we learn and practice in light of the false story in this text? It's this: get the story straight. Jesus really did rise from the dead. And then going back to the Bible, the text, and even the wider witness of Scripture. The gospel writers affirm that Jesus rose from the dead. We have the privilege to celebrate on this Resurrection Sunday morning the world-changing events of Jesus' resurrection and its impact on us even today, and talking about those a very real and relevant illustration. C, to have my life changed is too hard for me to believe, you might think, but God can change your life. And God can change your life because He is God Himself who conquered death for you. And then get the story straight that Jesus really did rise from the dead. When you think about a conclusion for your sermons, you want to think about ways in which you can bring together what you've been talking about in a relevant way. Could be an illustration. Could be, what are some other ways that you could think about this? How would you conclude this? Because if my purpose is, I want my listeners to celebrate the truthful story of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, what are some things that could be done to cultivate that, to bring it all together? A story is one. What else?
An exhortation
Uh-huh.
to celebrate that Jesus really did rise from the
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah. This is something that we want to do, isn't it? This is, as Christians, we name Him as Lord. And on this day, we celebrate His resurrection. This is something that we want to do, to recognize that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead. Oh yeah, we do this on this particular day, recognize on this particular, but we do it every single Sunday. Oh, we do it every single day. Do you see what I mean? Encouraging people toward that end. Okay? Anything else?
Like an action that somebody can take that day.
Okay.
For example, to so if they were gonna celebrate Easter a certain way,
Yes.
tradition or whatever, but in light of just, oh my God, this really happened or something, what's an action that they can tie to this idea?
Yeah, so many of you will be gathering around your tables to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus today. Maybe what you could do is during the time that you're passing the plates, talk about how Jesus has made a difference in your life. That His resurrection story is your story. What else? Yeah.
Sing a song.
Yeah. You can do that a couple different ways. Today, at the end of this service, we're going to be singing, Christ the Lord is risen today. Alleluia. let this become your song. When you sing those words, just don't mouth those words, mean those words. Or, as an assignment, today, when you sit around the table at celebrating Easter, the resurrection with your family, sing the first verse of Christ the Lord is risen today as an offering of praise to him and an underscoring of your embrace of this truth. That this Jesus really did rise from the dead. What else?
Emphasizing a benefit of
Okay.
getting the story straight.
Yeah, so
What's the benefit?
yeah,
What's the benefit?
What's the
of my
benefit?
life?
yeah, the benefit of getting the story straight is, eternal life in Christ, sins forgiven, a changed life, and being somebody who is able to get the story, to tell others about it as well. So you can think about it. There are a number of different kinds of ways to bring a sermon to conclusion that has different aspects. One of the things that can be a habit for us is we do the same, we close the sermons in the same way. So watch yourself. I have to watch myself that I don't conclude the sermon in the same way. Because there are so many, as we've just shared here moments ago, there's so many different ways in which we can conclude the sermon. And we can include several aspects of what we've been talking about here as well. But nevertheless, be aware that you can include a number of different kinds of approaches to concluding the sermon. So what we've done today is we've looked at ascertaining, mining the idea of the text, and staying as close as we can to the text so that we can state it in the subject and complement, an exegetical idea. And then we go to the homiletical idea, which is a contemporary applicational statement of the exegetical idea. And then we looked at what it means to put together an outline that has a measure of clarity to it, not just clear to us, but clear to our listeners. It's a lot that we've covered. Let me also just mention one other thing with regard to this outline. I'll say it this way. I write out my sermons, complete manuscript, but I don't manuscript like I'm writing a novel. I write it like this, underneath these ideas, because there are ideas that are coordinate, there are ideas that are subordinate. And so, do you see what I'm getting at? So I write out my outline manuscript, is what I call it. I start with this, and then I expand it so when I'm preparing for a message, I can see on the paper where the ideas are developing and what's under those ideas to support them. And so that's something I encourage you to consider, because it's one way for you to help to see visually how the sermon itself is developing in an outline manuscript form. So that's what we've been doing today, and of course we also have talked about the purpose. As a result of hearing this sermon, I want my listeners to, and this one is to celebrate in the truthful story of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That's really, in some ways, the concentration of Robinson's homiletic. The communication of a biblical concept derived from and transmitted through a historical, grammatical, and literary study of a passage in its context, which the Holy Spirit first applies to the personality and experience of the preacher, and then through the preacher applies to the listeners.